From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, the Senator versus the CIA.
It shows that the CIA's actions a decade ago are a stain on our value and on our history. The release of this 500-page summary cannot remove that stain, but it can and does say to our people and the world that America is big enough to admit when it's wrong and confident enough to learn from its mistakes.
Senate Intelligence Committee Chairwoman, Senator Dianne Feinstein, and committee Democrats on Tuesday released a long-awaited report on the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA's detention and interrogation program. Senator Feinstein outlined the report's 4 major conclusions. First, the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques, which included waterboarding, were not effective in collecting intelligence. Second, the CIA misled policymakers and the public on the CIA interrogation program. Third, CIA managers failed to supervise the program appropriately. And fourth, the program was far more brutal than the CIA presented. Question: what did Senator Feinstein hope to accomplish by making this summary public, Pat Buchanan?
Well, John, she hoped to damage the CIA, which had surveillance on her. She hoped to damage the Bush administration. But I'll tell you what she did. What she's got here is really a pretty vicious attack. It's a vindictive prosecutor's document. She didn't talk to CIA people. She didn't talk to the alleged people who did these grisly things. She talked about things we've known about for 10 years. She said it was a decade ago. She dredged this all up. She's damaged our relations with foreign intelligence agencies that have been exposed. She's damaged the reputation of the United States. And for what? We've heard these things. We knew about waterboarding. We knew all this stuff. She's got a few grisly details. This is, John, it's just like after Vietnam. The Church Committee came out and said, look at all these horrible things these American soldiers did, whom they cheered into Vietnam themselves when Kennedy and Johnson were in the White House.
Ellen.
I'm with John McCain on this one, who delivered a powerful speech on the Senate floor as someone who actually underwent torture himself. I think he's the most articulate person, the only one who really has first-hand experience with this. He basically said, A, torture doesn't work, B, what went on was worse than anybody was led to believe, and C, the American people deserve to know what was done in their name. And I think that is appropriate. The stain on this country is not that we're admitting that this went on, but the fact that it went on. And now this basically gives the government seal of approval that this country will not compromise its values again in search of dubious intelligence, because there's really no real evidence that this works.
Well, let's hear from the CIA Director John Brennan. On Thursday, CIA Director John Brennan explained and defended the agency's use of EITs. EIT stands for Enhanced Interrogation Techniques. Here he is.
The cause and effect relationship between the application of those EITs and the ultimate provision of the information is unknown and unknowable. But for someone to say that there was no intelligence of value, of use, that came from those detainees once they were subjected to EITs, I think that lacks any foundation at all.
Do you think the director of CIA's defense was persuasive?
Yeah, highly persuasive. I mean, if you look at what we know from open source material, and if you look at what the CIA continues to claim the EITs provided in certain areas, for example, in identifying the importance of the courier al-Kuwaiti for the bin Laden intelligence network from KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. If you look at the operational picture that the EITs provided, again, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah, al-Nashiri, in allowing American counterterrorism officials to generate understanding of how al-Qaeda operated in the very beginning, which we did not know, and actually driving intelligence towards plots like Darren Barrow, who was a British al-Qaeda plotter who was planning a major attack on the London Underground. Yes, there is intelligence that was provided, and the CIA is being dragged through the mud here for partisan reasons. The report, in my opinion, is a joke, and I use that word deliberately. I know it's a serious issue, but for the reasons that Pat mentions, not interviewing officers, it's slander.
You're talking about the Senator's report.
Correct.
Mort, do you have thoughts on this?
Yes, I mean, what it astonishes me is somehow or other the assumption that we live in this kind of innocent world, that where this kind of response in terms of trying to gain intelligence is simply off the moral table, shall we say. I think as a country, when we are up against some of the most vicious kind of people, we've got to do things like this. It's not pleasant. It's not, you know, gentlemen's games, okay? But we're not playing on those rules, and nor are the people on the other side. And so we have got to do some things that we wouldn't like to do but are necessary.
We are
excuse me. It's necessary for the defense of our country and for the people of this country.
Well, as the lone voice here on the other side, I would point out that the United States of America, as signatories to a lot of international agreements, as creators of international rules, we are hardly in a position to just ignore those rules when it's inconvenient. Secondly, the Senate staffers went over 6 million documents. They didn't talk to the CIA agents directly. They had transcripts of when those agents were interviewed, and they went through every one of the cases, and they found, they found no basis for a piece of intelligence that came as the result of an, as a result of an EIT leading to, excuse me, Pat, I want to finish my point. He makes the point that it led to the courier to Obama. That information came from several places, and it also came from the person who was waterboarded before they were waterboarded.
No,
these are some final details you choose.
We got on this point. What do you want to say to that? Hold on, Pat.
Just very quick, and I'll let Pat jump in, is that there is a mix of intelligence. That is true, but the EITs did provide intelligence.
What's the EIT?
Enhanced interrogation techniques. Okay, and let's call it. You know, I think waterboarding is torture. I think, but the other measures, conflating them all, sleep deprivation, stress positions, yeah, this is not pleasant stuff. It's easy for me to sit here and say that. But when you are dealing with al-Qaeda operatives who are specifically trained to resist interrogation, you need to use enhanced measures.
They cherry-picked this stuff over in that committee. This is a good one. This is a good one.
Right.
Forget all that. They got no context for this thing. They got to realize, John, this is not a war where you're fighting like the British Army or something like that. These people, these 9/11 people, are designed. They designed their programs to kill innocent people in great masses, whether it's 9/11, whether it's London subway, whether it's Madrid,
school today in
or any of these
Are you
places.
saying that the report the report put together for the senator from California was done by her employees,
it is a prosecutor's,
and that they were naive?
No, they're not.
They were let's put it that way. That's not.
They are naive.
They're uneducated in the field.
They're naive and they are vindictive. They went in here with a specific purpose, John, to damage that.
You have no right to judge. You have no right
exactly.
You have no right to judge.
Feinstein comes in with a stated position,
sure,
which was generated by her
staff.
It's
like a prosecutor that walks in and presents a case at trial. This guy's guilty of everything you can imagine.
Loyal amateurs, and that's the story.
You can't impugn the staffers like that. And secondly, you say Dianne Feinstein, who was under surveillance. Under surveillance because Brennan and the CIA
what about impugning
hacked
the CIA
into the Senate computers.
Eleanor, you are naive.
You are watching too much 24 in Homeland.
But you are naive if you don't think that these techniques or torture, which I don't favor, they work.
Let me move this forward.
That's one of the major findings.
Excuse me, let me move this forward. Why President Obama won't prosecute? Listen. Quote, Obama's problem is that if he can prosecute Republican office holders for authorizing torture, then the next Republican president can prosecute Obama and his subordinates for the many questionable legal actions of the Obama administration. Say the drone strike that killed Anwar al-Awlaki and 3 other American citizens. Senator Ted Cruz cites the drone strike as one of 76 alleged illegal actions by the Obama administration. You don't have to believe every one of Cruz's charges to see that Obama and his subordinates could spend years under investigation after he leaves office if a Republican president thought such a course of action politically expedient. Unquote. So writes Eric Posner for Slate.
Question: does anyone believe that the Justice Department investigation into the CIA interrogations could have produced evidence to support prosecutions, but that Eric Holder held off for fear of future Republican recriminations? Tom Rogan.
I think the reason why the president's not going to pursue prosecutions is not because of that, but more because he knows that CIA officers made the decisions in the best interest of the country with information at the time. We have to remember the president now receives the intelligence briefings from that level. It's noticeable that he has been quiet on this because he knows that the CIA have, this is not as Feinstein is presenting it to be, is my impression.
I have a question for Eleanor. Early in his administration, he had just taken over, and President Obama was concerned about torture. Do you remember any of that?
He campaigned on being opposed to torture, as did John McCain, I would add, and he's been opposed to torture from the beginning. It was one of his first acts in office was to end this program.
Well, look, if he did it, here's the reason he didn't do it. He would tear this country apart, and it would come back to bite him badly, because the American people would say, here are guys given this assignment at the beginning of a horrible war, we were expecting more attacks, and now you're going out and prosecuting them?
It would be very difficult. You could probably get the guy who was holding the water when they were doing waterboarding, but you'd have to go way into the CIA, to the tentacles, to find the people who crafted the policy. It's not going to happen.
It would destroy
and presidents generally do not go after political deeds of their predecessors, and Gerald Ford would be a major example of that in pardoning Richard Nixon.
Mort, you remember the early days after 9/11?
I think so.
Horrible days.
Yes, they were.
And we wanted to know, we wanted to make sure this never happened again.
Absolutely.
And that was the commitment and the
undertaking.
The full understanding, of course, of the CIA.
Without question.
Do you think they took liberties they shouldn't have taken?
No, I don't think they did. There may have been an occasional issue, but generally...
Or should we thank them if they did take some of those liberties?
Well, they may, but let me just say
and
this.
And the liberties were justified in being taken.
Under criminal law in America, you have to have an intention, okay, to break the law, to do a bad thing, okay? These people were working on behalf of the nation, on behalf of the United States. So I do not think they're comparable.
Well, they exceeded the legality of even the EITs that were presented to them. And the author of The Company Man, who was the lawyer at the CIA during this period, has called these EITs sadistic.
Well, some guys were punished.
Everybody acknowledges
Somebody
this
were
went
punished,
on.
but Mort is right. You have to go to motive if you're talking about crimes and things like that. What were they? They weren't sadists. They're trying to get information to stop somebody from blowing up more Americans.
Okay, don't forget the McLaughlin Group has its own website, and you can watch this program or earlier programs on the web at any time from anywhere in the universe, even black holes, at McLaughlin.com. Could anything be easier? McLaughlin.com. Or more exciting? You know what blowback is.
Yeah.
What is it?
Blowback in intelligence terms is a covert operation that at a future point produces negative political ramifications.
Is that what's been going on here?
Well,
an examination of blowback?
Exactly, yeah.
Issue 2, pomp or circumstance?
I remember when George was born, I forgot to actually work out whether it was a boy or girl. The excitement of the event and everything else was chaos. So you suddenly like, actually it's a boy in the end. Yeah. So no, it's good. But we had it's going to be interesting next year.
President Obama knows how to please the American press. Give them a royal. This week, Prince William and his wife, Catherine, visited the United States. Alongside meetings with luminaries, including President Obama and Hillary Clinton, the royal couple held a number of charity fundraising events. Behind the smiles, however, there are emerging signs that the special relationship might be strained. Take defense cooperation. Due to spending cuts over the past few years, today the UK government is barely meeting its 2% of gross domestic product, GDP, spending commitment as a NATO member. In contrast, the United States spends nearly 4% of its GDP on defense. And get this, some, including London's prestigious Royal United Services Institute, are predicting that UK defense spending may actually fall below 2% next year. Causing worry in Washington, the UK is already scaling back purchases of advanced F-35 fighter jets for its 2 new carriers. Speaking to the BBC last month, a retired senior British Air Force officer warned that the UK might have to surrender key warfighting capabilities.
At one end, you've got the really hard, cutting-edge, bristling with warfighting capability carrier that has the fast jets on there, able to prosecute in the most dangerous circumstances difficult warfare. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got carriers that can take helicopters, carry troops around and do humanitarian relief operations. So there's a very big spectrum of capability that you can exploit with a carrier. And I think the decisions that we have to make as a nation is, can we afford to use these carriers at the high end?
Question, with Britain cutting where it counts, where does this leave America? Is Britain abandoning us to a special relationship of pomp without policy and circumstance? Mort Zuckerman.
No, I don't think they are, but there's no doubt but that the British economy is a lot weaker than it has been relatively, and that's been going on for quite a while, and they've had to cut back. It's not something that they don't want to do, but on some level they can't afford to do it. Their economy has been a very weak economy for quite a long time, and I think you just have to reflect those kinds of basic facts in all policies, including defense policy. It's true of a lot of the European countries in general.
Right, the friction with the European countries over there not paying what we think is their fair share it's been there for generations. I would rather talk about the reason the royals were in this country. They were promoting their cause, which is the trafficking of wild animals and elephants and poaching of elephants, and I find that a lot more interesting than trying to find a problem with
journalists too.
Right, trying to find a problem with the UK on defense spending.
You want to talk about the elephants?
Well, I think that's a good thing, stopping the poaching. But let me say this, the Brits are the best friends we've got, and it is sad to see, both militarily and economically, as Mort mentions, they are a receding power. And they've got this movement in Scotland to break away, and they've got the UKIP wants to get out of the EU. And it's hard to see them as being the reliable friend that fought along our side in Korea, fought along our side in Desert Storm, fought along our side in the invasion of Iraq. They went up to Basra. And so I think it's sad, John, but quite frankly, the United States and the West, as well as the Brits, are gradually receding as the major force in the world.
Pat, I want you to think of the impact of Putin's behavior on the UK's assessment of its defense spending. NATO officials, this is the beginning of an answer, have called for a 3% of GDP defense budget for all member states. That's a hike. A number of states close to Russia, such as Sweden, are contemplating greater increases.
Nobody in the NATO, I believe, except the United States, has got 3%. The Turks have a little over 2%. But let me say this, John.
In other words, they're being squeezed.
NATO made a terrible mistake, in my judgment, when they moved the NATO line right up into the Baltic states and Moldova. They haven't moved to Moldova yet, but Romania, Bulgaria, because you're in Russia's front yard. And that is the main problem, I believe, we've had with Putin. We moved this thing right into their front yard.
I'd still rather talk about the elephants.
Well, I think there's the big problem is I actually tend to think that Europe, the UK as well, are letting the United States down. I mean, if you think about the United States, we are carrying the weight of international security. The big problem with the European Union is that because they have bloated welfare states that have failed, and the statistics, youth unemployment 50% in Spain, people out of the economy prove that, the pressure to reduce defense spending is relentless, and it will continue. But the problem is, if you have an alliance, there is mutual responsibility. And yes, the UK is letting the United States down. If they're talking about cutting F-35s, which is the Joint Strike Fighter, and having their carriers essentially as floating humanitarian platforms, that's a problem for us because it speaks to power projection deficits.
Is Britain's economic health weakening?
It's improving at the moment. The UK economy is growing, but again, because of the level of state spending, it is crowding out precious, defense spending. It's easy to just get the United States to pay for the weight of that.
What I'm seeing here is that across the channel, the Eurozone is slipping into recession, but from Greece to Ireland, voters are tiring of austerity programs. It's a very difficult time to hike defense spending.
The U.S. economy is the colossus on the world stage right now. You may not acknowledge it on this set, but the president does have a lot more clout. cloud internationally because the other
your point is well taken. I think
really sagging.
I think we're not fighting with you on that, are we?
Greece is pretty much ready to. I think they're on the verge of a possible default. They got 3 quick elections for this new president. If they fail, the government goes down, and you got this left-wing Syriza.
But Europe cannot. They won't reform their social welfare systems. So this is the problem.
Pat, from Greece to Ireland, voters are tiring of austerity programs. It's a very difficult time to hike defense spending.
It sure isn't.
And that's why the Brits are cutting back.
Merkel is under pressure to move toward Keynesianism economics and Keynesianism monetary policy because those folks have had enough of this austerity for 3 years.
And
one day, Italy or one of them is going to say goodbye and good luck.
The UK
what do you want to do, lecture us on Keynesianism now?
Yes, as Nixon said, I'm a Keynesian now.
We're all Keynesians now, right?
Issue 3, $1 trillion Christmas present.
When you look at the number of agreements that had to be struck on funding levels, on riders, and other provisions, there's a lot in this bill. And the appropriators did, frankly, a marvelous job. I wish it had been done last week, but it wasn't. And so here we are. I'm proud of the work that they've done. Look forward to it passing with bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate in the coming days.
Midnight Thursday was the deadline to avoid a government shutdown. But before the clock ran out, Congress passed a massive $1.1 trillion spending bill, averting a shutdown of government as happened in 2013. The spending includes new money for Ebola response, for worldwide embassy scrutiny, for aid for allies Egypt and Jordan, and for funding to deal with undocumented children crossing the U.S. border. More controversially, however, the bill relaxes regulations in the Dodd-Frank banking law and increases the cap on political donations. Also, the bill allows pension plans that are heading for insolvency to make cuts to existing retiree benefits. Advocacy groups and liberal Democrats like Elizabeth Warren demanded a tougher stance against the bill.
Question. 2 months ago, the nation was mired in political gridlock. Suddenly we have a budget breakthrough. What changed, Pat Buchanan?
Well, John, I think first the Democrats realized that they got to get something through now, and this is the best deal they're going to get because in the new year, if they got a short-term CR, they're really going to get hammered. But look, people are very angry with this bill, and I think Boehner and Obama, I think basically the base of both parties has been sold out. I think, Elizabeth Warren is exactly right. There's a big sellout for Jamie Dimon calls in there, and they've got this special taxpayer guarantee for their derivatives and all the rest of it, gutting Dodd-Frank. And they did nothing about the amnesty. So they're really both parties, their bases and their core people are really enraged.
Well, what did the Democrats realize come next year?
Well, they realize that they're going to lose the Senate.
They're losing leverage.
Sure,
right.
They're going to lose the Senate.
The deal now, right?
Yeah, the White House was with Elizabeth Warren on the substance of the objections, the facts that you shouldn't be able to let the big banks remove another of the provision that cramps their style. But the White House made the calculation that if the Democrats forced a government shutdown over this, they'd get blamed, obviously, and next year it's going to be worse. But what we are seeing is the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party asserting itself, and there's a lot of energy around that, and I think it really does predict next year's politics, and Hillary Clinton, who's still the putative nominee on the Democratic side, is going to have to figure out how to come up with an economic policy that takes into account the anger of Elizabeth Warren and the alliance she's made with the Tea Party. They're skeptical of Wall Street. The Tea Party is paranoid about the Federal Reserve. Elizabeth Warren isn't intimidated by the Federal Reserve. We've got a great economic fight coming up ahead next year.
Elizabeth Warren was special assistant to the president for a short while. And now she is 65 years of age. She was born in Oklahoma City, and she's senior senator. She's senior senator right now from Massachusetts. Senior senator.
Well, by minutes. She's not. I don't think she is going to run for president. I don't think she wants to run for president, but the draft Elizabeth Warren movement is well underway, and that's where the energy is in the party.
She helped herself with this, John. She helped herself with this.
Yeah. Republicans.
I mean, a lot of Republicans were cheering her on.
That's including Pat Buchanan, I think.
I think there's an issue
Where
here.
do I sign up?
My opinion is that this is good that this has been passed. It shows the government can work. There's an absence of trust in the people. I think the opinion polling data will reflect that people are actually happy something has been done. Both bases are upset, and to some degree at this moment in time that's a good thing. It shows that politicians have been willing to lead and buck that trend. I know Pat and Eleanor probably disagree with me, but speaking very quickly to the Dodd-Frank rule, it's very populist to hit the big banks, and to some degree, yeah, that's important. That's a good thing. Look at what's happened. But at the same time, the regulations in Dodd-Frank in certain ways have been a big problem. For someone like me who has low assets, the banking fees that they've pushed on to transfer costs to consumers, that is a problem that has hurt the people at the bottom of the ladder. So the idea that Warren purveys that Dodd-Frank is some miracle that has saved the union
but this is about one provision, not the entire act.
Look, how do you think of Elizabeth Warren?
If the Democratic Party gets identified by Elizabeth Warren, they'll never see national preeminence or dominance. She represents a very small, very intense part of the Democratic Party, similarly in the country, but the Democrats have to get somebody much closer to the center to win national elections.
She represents a lot of people who feel like they've been screwed by the economic system in this country.
With national politics and economic power are growing inside both parties. It's just like Europe. I mean, we're a mirror of what's happened in a lot of places in Europe.
Predictions, Pat.
For this month, the Greek government's going to be on the brink of basically collapsing, but the key prediction is Venezuela defaults.
Eleanor.
The Senate committee report on torture will be turned into a book and will make the bestseller list, just like the original 9/11 Commission report. The American people are not afraid of the truth, and they deserve to know it.
In the coming months, coming weeks in fact, you're going to see a lot more reporting on the role that Iran has cultivated in Iraq, displacing the Iraqi government and empowering Iraqi Shia militias to dominate the political environment in that country.
This year, virtually every European country, with one exception, will show a growth rate that'll be under 3%, and therefore the conditions of Europe are going to continue to deteriorate.
I predict consumer spending this holiday season, Christmas, will be the strongest in 6 years. It will be fueled by lower gasoline prices at the pump, with the cost of a fill-up down as much as $25 a fill-up for many motorists. People will have money to spend this year, and merchants will reap the rewards. Bye-bye.